I'll save you the rambly preamble and just go, yeah, it's the end of the year. Or more realistically, it's the beginning of the year. I'll be lucky if I even actually finish this damn thing. This was a very, very good year for video games. You probably don't need me to tell you that Elden Ring came out. And yeah, it's a phenomenal game. It's been talked to death at this point, and although I love it, I feel like the other games that really stood out to me and stuck with me this year aren't talked about nearly as much. Not even really scripting this. I'm just going completely off the cuff here, so there's some video games I want to talk about. Instead of talking about these in a numbered list or anything like that, I'm just gonna kind of go in the order that makes sense to me. And the game that I feel like I should talk about first and foremost is the one I think is the most accessible, broadly likable, and the easiest sell. Because the point of this video is to potentially sell you on some video games. Some games that I really enjoyed. And realistically, not everyone's gonna stick around for very long, so if I'm only gonna get you for like 1 or 2 games, I want to make sure the first one is one that I think will get the most people interested if they haven't already heard about it. And for me, there's no game this year that is an easier sell than Vampire Survivors. Vampire Survivors marketed itself as a bullet hell where you are the bullet hell, and that instead of you having to dodge all of this random bullshit, you are the thing spawning all the random bullshit, mowing down hordes of enemies. It's a similar mindset to like playing a Warriors game, where a lot of the satisfaction comes from just cleaving down hordes of enemies. It feels like a game designed for predatory microtransactions, which then pulls the ultimate bait and switch of being one of the most kindly monetized games I think I've seen in ages. For their entire early access period, as they kept adding updates and updates all for free, the price was like around $3.50, fairly cheap, and they announced there was going to be a permanent price upgrade when it went to 1.0, and that upgrade was just to $5, and they recently had a whole big content expansion that is only like $1, so this game costs basically nothing even when it's not on sale. Currently, at the time of recording, the winter sale is going on Steam right now, and you can get the game and the DLC together for around $5, I think. And you're gonna get more like content in this $5 package than you'll get out of, honestly, a lot of AAA releases. There's a whole fleshed out bestiary written by Stephanie Sterling. They have worked on this game, and their writing is very fantastic in it. The gameplay loop is very simple. There's not a lot of strategy or skill beyond your build, like what items you pick up, but it's very addictive. It's a great time waster game. It is by far the most played game on my Steam Deck, and it's not even funny. If this game gets a mobile release, like on like Android and iOS, it might genuinely take over the world. It is very addictive, but there's no microtransactions at all. I think of every game on this list, despite it being simple and, not the most fleshed out, because, it is basically an auto battler where you just move your character around, stack enough garlic, and you've basically won. It's a big signifier that the big endgame money dump is just a stat that just makes the game harder for no additional benefit, just so you have some reason to not go completely brain dead playing it. That should speak to the ease of gameplay here, but it's not completely brainless because the different items have different combos together, so there is thought to it, and I think its simplicity honestly does it a lot of favors, especially at its really low price point. And I think out of any game on this list, this is one that I could recommend basically anyone trying, because it's so simple, it's so cheap, and it's already been kind of spawning its own little spin-off genre. There's multiple games that have been coming out and getting fairly successful this year as well, off the back of what Vampire Survivor has been doing. There's really not much to be said about Vampire Survivors because it really is what it says on the tin. It is a Castlevania-coded anti-bullet hell where you run around, have fun, and just live out the ultimate roguelike power fantasy almost every run. And if you want something to kind of chill and to turn your brain off or just to play in between doing things to kind of just get your mind off stuff, I think Vampire Survivors is a great choice for that. I led with Vampire Survivors because it's a very accessible game, it's an easy recommend to all types of people. The next game is not that. If I were to best categorize the type of people who should play this game, I'd say that Neon White is a game made for freaks. Now, it's not a specific breed of freak. I think it invites all sorts of freaks, either from its very cringy on purpose writing and dialogue where they know every character they're writing is like an insufferable piece of shit, but that's like a lot of the fun of it. And then from a completely different perspective, the gameplay is where the real freaks come out, because what Neon White offers is a chance for you to just completely lose yourself in a game. I dumped 20 hours into Neon White in the month of July, and it was just a blur of repeating levels over and over again. I'm not really a speedrunner. I like speedrunning. I've watched GDQs and the like, but I've never really sped run myself. But there was just something in Neon White's mechanics that just drove me to this different mindset than I've ever really played a game before. I didn't care about continuing the story. I wanted to keep shaving my time down. Like basically any speed-oriented game, you get different levels of like completion reward based on how fast you were. You know, you can get a bronze medal or whatever, and in Neon White, the platinum medals are the top thing. That's what you get the achievements for and all that. But there's actually the secret red medals that are dev times, and the moment I realized the red medals existed, my only purpose for playing video games was to collect those red medals. Those 20 hours of Neon White were spent entirely in the first 3 zones of the game. I just completely lost myself to just wanting to shave my time as low as humanly possible, and it was really fun. Neon White's gameplay is almost everything Neon White offers. It certainly presents a story, and I don't think it's a bad one, but really the reason you're playing Neon White is because it's the sublime mix of speed tech and gunplay. You have to both actually accurately hit shots, but then also use those to combine them into these really fluid chains of motion. I've not really played a video game that moved like Neon White. The different guns all have these different abilities that are almost entirely movement oriented, even if it doesn't look like it at first. It's a complicated game, but it's also so simple. All of the tools they give you are very straightforward, but there's infinite ways to use them. It feels like a puzzle box sometimes. In that recurring hunt for red medals, I kept constantly finding that I'd completely change my path for a level and find a whole new route that could shave seconds, even though from a basic first run through, it didn't even look like the level had alternate pathways. It's beyond just like a shortcut in Mario Kart. Neon White's level design is some of the most just sublimely put together puzzle design I've seen in just games in general. Because Neon White, despite being a shooter, despite being about running fast and movement tech, is a puzzle game. It's great. I think if any of what I said sounds remotely interesting, pick up this game. It is going to just consume your brain in the best way, and that is maybe the highest recommendation I can give a game, I think. Neon White might be your favorite game that came out in 2022. You might just not know it yet. I feel of two minds talking about my next entry because a big part of why it's so high up for me is directly tied to the question of difficulty in video games. And as anyone online could tell you, there's no clean way of talking about difficulty in video games. The Soulsborne series by itself has spawned so much circular discussion about difficulty and how important or unimportant it is that in general I don't want to just add to that. But at the same time, I found this very interesting disconnect in where Citizen Sleeper starts and where it ends. Citizen Sleeper definitely sells itself as a hardcore game, everything that I heard talk about it does sell it as a survival game as much as it is a story-driven visual novel. And it definitely is a survival game because you are deteriorating day by day. You are a sleeper, this half-robotic, half-organic simulacrum meant to house the uploaded brain of someone who had sold themselves to a company, essentially. It is this strange existence on this burnt out space station. This game that wants you to feel so hopeless and alone. It wants you to feel like your time is stretched infinitely thin. The worse your body's condition is, the less dice you have. And the less dice you have, the less actions you can take, let alone the fact that a low-scoring die means you're likely to fail whatever action you try or get a negative result, but yet you only have so many die, so you might as well still do it, even if it means you're just going into a potential failure. Citizen Sleeper wants you to feel so isolated and alone and broken and like nothing could go right, both in its narrative and its gameplay. All of its storylines start with these really improbable or outright outlandish feeling opportunities for you. These pipe dreams that you can only kind of sniff at, or these vague threats that you could never hope to overcome. But where Citizen Sleeper tricks everyone is that the game isn't nearly as cruel as it wants you to think it is. As quickly as I felt stretched thin by the mechanics, I found myself able to circumvent them. Narratively speaking, this game propels you upward. It says that yes, things are bad, but they can get better. And it's not just from what your character does, but from how they interact with others. And it's a very communal game. They're just people trying their best in a horribly bleak scenario. And I think what Citizen Sleeper offers to the cyberpunk genre is this idea that it's going to be okay as long as you actively try and as long as you let people in. Citizen Sleeper is a very hopeful game, and I think it kind of gets there by making you feel so hopeless at the start, to a point where I almost feel like I'm almost spoiling something by talking about this, but it's not even a spoiler, it's just naturally how the game unfolds. That's how every game unfolds. You eventually conquer the game. You overcome its systems. You're not supposed to be beaten by the game. You're supposed to beat it. But in Citizen Sleeper, it so intrinsically feels like you are pulling yourself out from oblivion, that you are actively defying these very strict game systems, even though these means of defiance were also equally game systems. Citizen Sleeper doesn't have anything I'd consider revolutionary in its game design, but I think what it does with its narrative and its survival mechanics, its die mechanics in particular, are really interesting. And I could keep rambling about Citizen Sleeper for probably ages. I haven't even mentioned any of the characters in specific. I think the character Feng is genuinely one of my favorite characters I've encountered in fiction in this year. And I don't want to ramble though. I want you to experience this game, because a lot of the joy of Citizen Sleeper is going through it yourself, finding these storylines, making these connections with these characters, and making your own story in a world that actively is saying you're not supposed to have one. It can hit home, you know? The game's also getting free story updates too, like they're adding new characters and storylines beyond even just me gushing about it. It's bang for your buck too. It's genuinely great. I love Citizen Sleeper, and I hope some more people play it. I didn't expect to be talking about Pokemon in a video like this. I really didn't. I'm a big Pokemon fan. I always have been. One of my earliest memories is playing Pokemon. It's been a part of my life forever, and I will always love it. But at the same time, there's been this lack of a spark in the series for me for a while. I enjoyed Sword and Shield. I think they're fine games. They were definitely overhated. But to me, they weren't exactly what I was looking for. Some people say that the games were too child-oriented, too easy, but to me it was just that it felt like they were sprucing up the same old thing and just shipping it back out. And I was okay with that, you know? Like, Pokemon's a massive media franchise. It's so much beyond just the games, and at the end of the day, I wasn't going to be upset that Pokemon wasn't entirely for me anymore in the games. So I guess I was really surprised when Pokemon Violet was extremely for me. I still can't believe it, honestly. Like, it's not a perfect game. It's buggy, although definitely way less buggy than a lot of people sold it to be. Of course, some people did have actual major issues, and I can't fully undersell those, but it's not a Sonic 06 level game, not by any means. It's rushed, it's perhaps a sign of the times that AAA games can come out like this, and part of me does feel a bit bad for gleefully paying $60 for a game that does feel so rushed, but I don't regret spending that money on Pokemon Violet. I feel like Pokemon Violet, even though it's rough around the edges, it's got so much heart to it. More heart than I feel like the series has had in a long time. It's all subjective, of course. I know people who truly felt that way about Sword and Shield, or Sun and Moon, or have never felt that the heart's ever left the series. But for me personally, just playing through Violet, enjoying its open world, its character writing, I had felt a joy with Pokemon that I haven't felt since Black and White, when I had ordered those games myself with money I had saved up over the year, because I didn't have a job. I was like, middle school, probably? I forget the exact year. And Black and White was a truly jaw-dropping game for me, and while I wouldn't say that Violet dropped my jaw very much, it certainly was the breath of fresh air I've been wanting from Pokemon. I like the characters, their interactions are nice. Nemona is like the best rival. Arven is like genuinely one of my favorite characters in Pokemon ever. His storyline is something I didn't really expect a mainline Pokemon game to cover, but this story hit actual serious notes that were earned. I don't think it's the most well-written story ever. It wasn't making me sob or anything, but it was really engaging. I truly loved my time with Pokemon Violet. I beat the entire game without fighting a single trainer who wasn't story required, because I've always wanted to just be able to do that in this Pokemon game, you know? If I'm underleveled, then so be it. That's my problem. And it was nice. I don't want to consider Violet like a Game of the Year contender, because I don't think in good conscience I could ever consider a game so unpolished or rushed as a true Game of the Year, but it's maybe the game that I was the most impressed by this year, just in terms of how it surprised me. I expected Elden Ring to be amazing. I didn't expect to love Pokemon Violet. So while I said I was trying to, avoid talking about AAA games, I did want to talk about this one because it does mean something to me. Before anything else, I should make it very clear that I do not mean anything objective when I say something is my Game of the Year. If I were trying to make a guess at an objective Game of the Year, I'd probably just say Elden Ring for its scope, general quality, and the fact that probably no other game will have a bigger impact on games going forward this year than Elden Ring. But that's a boring answer. I'm going to tell you about my pick for Game of the Year, my completely subjective, based only on my own experiences and preferences, and that's why in the face of a year where Elden Ring came out, I can confidently say my Game of the Year is point-and-click adventure game Norco. It has amazing art, it has amazing writing, its themes and storytelling are phenomenal, but if you're looking for a video game, I don't want you to feel like you're coming into something that you're not. Norco is the kind of game where its combat can be turned off if you so choose. But if you're okay with games like that, if you enjoy a more narrative-focused experience, I think Norco is maybe one of the best games I've played. Norco, more than most video games, looses itself from the ego of being a video game. I don't feel like Norco necessarily cares about being a video game in the sense that it wants to do all of these impressive things. Norco's a video game because the people who created Norco knew exactly how to use video games to tell their story. I feel like there's something to be said about games that are fully aware of what they're doing and are fully leaning more into their storytelling elements. Point-and-click adventure games are a great example of this. Truly what you're getting out of a game like Norco is this really earnest story and this really heavy thematic experience. You really get to immerse yourself more than you would with a book or a movie because you are actively rummaging through this beautiful pixel art of this grimy cyberpunk meets Southern Gothic near future New Orleans. It's genuinely beautiful and genuinely frightening at times. It has, unironically, the most phenomenal jump scare. Maybe I'm overselling it a bit, but I truly was hooked by this game. Its story and themes just spoke to me on a level that most video games just never really get to. It's using what exists already in established point-and-click mechanics to tell the best point-and-click story I've gone through. In particular, I feel like the game's protagonist, Kay, she hits close to home in ways that I really didn't expect a character like that to. She, in a way, tries to come off as more flat and unpersonable than she is. She actively conflicts with the narrator. I also come from a poor corporate town in the South that was not too far from major areas, but it itself was kind of small and run down, and everything about it that worked only worked because corporate money was pumping it, keeping it alive. Honestly, Norco feels like home in the best and worst ways. Norco can pluck at anxieties, but yet also find comforts I didn't really know I had. In general, I have a very complicated relationship with religion, and I feel like Norco's take on religion and its different views on it kind of helped me in some ways. Overall, it feels like Norco is a love letter and a eulogy all at once. It's this very emotional narrative, and it leaves a lot for your own mind to fill in the blanks and kind of fill in your own experiences to help color things. And I think that's part of the beauty of it, because it's so specific and so personal, yet it invites you to also be personal with it. I did not grow up in Norco, but Norco feels like home to me in a way. Even though my home is a different flavor and has different surroundings and different demons and different angels, it's not too different. I think more than any game in this video, I hope people check out Norco. I've chatted with the developers and the artists for this game, and there's so much raw passion, and not to say these other games don't have this passion either, but more than most games, I feel like Norco is truly a hidden gem. More than any other game I've talked about, I've not had people to talk about Norco with. I've talked to people about Norco, I've tried to sell people on it, and I hope I've at least maybe convinced one or two of you to check it out. There is a demo, I believe, that covers all of Act 1, available for free on Steam, by the way. But Norco is such a personal and an earnest statement. It is a game that knows exactly what it wants to do, and while I don't want to discredit other games on this list, I feel like Norco deserves its time in the sun. I don't want to spoil it along the way, so the best I can do is just hype you up and say please give Norco a shot. A lot of games are so long these days. We have these games that want you to spend all of your time on them with battle passes and seasons. They want these games to be active parts of your lifestyles forever. And while Norco only asked about, a couple sessions worth of time from me, it's sticking with me longer than any of those service games ever will, and maybe it will for you too. Honestly, I really could keep going, and part of me does kind of want to. There were a lot of really nice indie games this year, and while I wouldn't consider Cult of the Lamb, Dwarf Romantic, or Card Shark Game of the Year material, I think they're definitely really worth your time if any of them look interesting to you at a glance. But I've already spent enough time rambling on about my favorite games this year, so I don't want to take too much more of your time. More than anything, I just hope you found something in this video that interests you. There's a lot of really great games out there, and it feels like a lot of people don't really seem to notice them. I see a lot of recurring trends of people saying that games have kind of gone bad, and while AAA gaming has seemed somewhat dire lately with loot boxes and all sorts of really scummy monetization schemes and generally rushed out games and crunch and all these other horrible things, but beneath the surface there's genuinely wonderful indie games games out there, and I feel like some of the best games we've gotten in a long times are coming out from these indie developers. And while I did wax poetic about Pokemon for a bit, I hope more than anything this video kind of showed some people some interesting indie games they could consider, because if you really don't look more into these indie titles, you're really missing out on some of the potentially best games you could be playing out there. Elden Ring might be the most influential and biggest game of the year, and it will probably have the biggest impact going forward, but I feel like these games might have a lot of impact going forward too, because people in the know will play them and they will get around, and they are genuinely great. I'm just hopeful that more people will play them sooner rather than later, and maybe you'll play some of them yourself. On that note, if you played any games this year, especially any indie games that you really love, please tell me about them in the comments. I will genuinely read them. I am interested. I'm always down for cool game recs. Or not. I'm fine with that too. I just hope that if you did stick around and watch this video all the way through for some reason, that you did enjoy it, and that you have a nice day.